All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It is 12 o'clock noon. We appreciate those of you who are joining us for today's media availability with Assistant City Manager and Director of Planning, Design, and Development, Taiwo Jayoba. We appreciate you all taking the time to join us today as we talk about the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan and our public outreach efforts over the next several weeks and months. And just to give you all a quick rundown of what we're going to do. As normal, we ask that you use the raise my hand feature in WebEx to let us know when you have a question, and then we will call on you. And at this time, I will turn it over to Taiwo Jayoba, who will make some opening comments.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me in front of you today to talk to you again, to chat with you about Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Like my colleague said, my name is Taiwo Jayoba. I'm our city's planning director and as well as assistant city manager. In that role as assistant city manager, not only do I have touch point with planning, but I also work with folks in the Charlotte area transit system, in the Charlotte Department of Transportation, as well as housing and neighborhood services. So that gives us a really good opportunity as we talk about the Charlotte of the future, not only to talk about land use plan, but also mobility options, housing opportunities for people, how people get from work to house, how they get from house to places to play, how they essentially do life in our city. I thank all of you for working with us over the last several months, especially almost 2 years now, as we've been working on this comprehensive plan, culminating in our October 31st engagement where we rolled out the draft of the comprehensive plan itself. Let me talk about that a little bit. So on October 31st, we were competing with Halloween. We were competing with pre-election rallies and parades. We were competing, obviously, with a little bit of a chilly weather. But thankfully, we still had over 500 people turned up for that event. Residents who lived nearby and in different parts of the city, businesses, developers that I had an opportunity to also interact with. I know that we had a number of our elected officials, thanks to Mayor Lyles and Mayor Pro Tem, who were there, as well as some of our council members who were there as well, specifically council members Johnson, Councilmember Augustine, and Newton, who were there. We also had a few of our planning commissioners as well. It was really good to have this well-balanced group to really listen to different presentations, but also had opportunity to ask questions. So it was not just a presentation, but it was also an opportunity to do a questions and answer session with people who wanted to know what this plan really meant, what will be happening going forward. And that's a very important question, as a matter of fact, because it's one thing to deliver and release the plan. It's another thing to actually begin to talk about what happens between now and Council's public hearing in March of 2021 and eventual adoption in April of 2021. Between this month and March, we're going to set up a series of forums that we call ongoing community conversations, where we will have different people that will be able to participate virtually and be asking questions. We will send that information out this month as to when and what days of the week and what times during the week we're going to be having these ongoing conversations. I call it community conversations because at the end of the day, it's about conversations with our community to talk about different things in these comprehensive plans, things that excite you, things that concern you, things that you really need clarity on, things that maybe you've heard from other communities, but why will Charlotte be primed to do something like this? So I'm looking forward to that. It's an opportunity to have a dialogue. We may not necessarily be able to resolve issues right as you're asking us, but we will be able to respond at least to some of them and have conversations with you. And then in March of 2021, like I said earlier, we'll have a public hearing at the council, which also provides another opportunity for people to be able to express their feedback to us. And then eventually, council would take a vote in April. But somewhere in there will be the role of the Planning Commission, which is appointed to oversee a lot of things that relate to our land use planning in the city, chaired by Sam Spencer and Kipper Samuel. They've been working with us over the last 24 months on this comprehensive plan, being part of our ambassadors and advisors group, and have been really rolling up their sleeves, helping us to shape the plan up to this point. They will also be able to hear this at their March meeting and then make a recommendation to council just before council takes the decision in April. So I really want to thank you so much for pushing the message out for us, for helping people to know about their engagement on October 31. But I will ask you to continue to do that for us because, again, this is new for us, especially for those who have moved to Charlotte only in the last couple of decades. The last time we had a plan like this was 1975. We've had a series of plans in between then and now, but this particular plan really mirrors what was there in 1975 in that not only does it talk about our future, it talks about policies and how we can really truly get there. So getting the community to be familiar with some of the nuances, the definitions, the visions, the challenges of understanding some of the framework, we really want to be able to get people to understand this because it's going to affect everybody in our city. So once again, thank you. I'll be definitely talking about the game as we go on. Part of the draft that we released on October 31 included distribution of this city building game that we call Charlotte Future City Building Game. I actually have one at home. I tried playing this with my daughter 2 weekends ago. It's very engaging. The Knight Foundation actually sponsored this, and it was developed by one of our local artists, local gamers, Potions and Pixels. And so I will encourage you. We've got about 1,000 games to distribute, so I will encourage you to go to our website, CLTfuture.com, and you'll be able to know how we can get you more of these games to be able to share with the community. So I'll end there, and if there are any specific questions for me, I'll be glad to take them. Thank you. So maybe while they're thinking on their question, I can actually share a few things about
recommendations for the transformational mobility network. So what should the public expect from those talks tomorrow night?
Tomorrow night with the Charlotte Moves Task Force? That's the question. So the Charlotte Moves Task Force has been meeting since May of this year. As some of you are familiar with my phrase that says, as you grow, you also have to plan your flow, right? Your flow of traffic. As we grow as a city, it's very important that we're no longer going to be able to rely on just the automobile, the single occupant vehicles. But how do we invest in different means of mobility for our community to be able to connect with wherever they go in our city? So the Charlotte Moves Task Force has been looking at that since May of this year, essentially looked at all the different plans that have been adopted by council and vetted by the public over the last several years, such as the 2030 Transit System Plan, or our Strategic Energy Action Plan, or our Charlotte Walks, Charlotte Bikes Plan, and creating a mobility network out of all of these things that not only will connect people from housing to jobs and to recreational spaces, but also how does it impact the environment in terms of air quality, in terms of resiliency, and how do we pay for it? So over the last few weeks, we've talked about the fact that this vision could actually result in $8 to $12 billion investment, understanding that you need big partners to be able to help you with that. In the past, Charlotte has been successful in having the federal government and the state government partner with us on the Blue Line, for example, and also other transportation investments that we've made. We believe that this partnership will continue. And if that partnership continues, we are making a big assumption that they will partner to a degree where they will pay about 50% of this $8 to $12 billion in investment, and the local piece of it will be another 50%. So we've been chatting with our task force over the last few weeks about, all right, if you're going to pay for this, then how do you involve the community? obviously, for what we know, there are different ways to pay for this type of thing. But one that is very obvious to a lot of us is sales tax. And also another one is property tax. And so tomorrow when we meet with the task force, they have 2 more meetings to go, tomorrow's meeting and then December 3rd. Tomorrow when we meet with them, we will be having a conversation with them around, and, this mobility network, is this exactly what we all discussed? And, does this really look like what you all agreed to endorse? And we talk about that $8 to $12 billion, and of course the $4 to $6 billion piece of which will be local, and then talk about the method for paying for it. Essentially, 3 things. What is this mobility network? How do we invest in it? And how do we keep ourselves accountable to make sure that once we make this investment, we're doing this together for our community? So that's what we'll be having tomorrow. It will be a lot of facilitation, a lot of conversation with the task force, which will result in a final set of recommendations in December, at their December 3rd meeting. And then eventually they will come to council on December 14th to present their recommendation to council.
Our next question will be from Danielle.
Hey, Taiwo, thanks for taking the time. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit, the plan talks a lot about transit-oriented development, mixed-use development, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the strategy to prevent displacement and gentrification like we've seen in some of the transit-oriented development areas currently, along the Blue Line, for example. Like, how do you sorry, I muted myself. How do you look at that and, the future, especially as we're discussing the Silver Line, and how this plan can, create that development without displacing residents?
We have to be strategic about it, and we have to be intentional as well. And so as we invest in more corridors, we have to make sure that we build into those corridors how we protect people who live in naturally occurring affordable housing units, which we call NOAA, along those corridors. One thing that I'm looking at carefully right now, which we really have in our comprehensive plan, we talk about mitigating displacement. But one of the things that we also talked about is what we saw that Austin just did in their their recent referendum for transit. Even though they were going after a $7.1 billion investment in public transit that will build 2 light rail systems, they also had about $300 and so million that was programmed into that dollar amount to actually protect affordable housing along those corridors. That could mean purchasing or acquiring properties along those corridors and making sure that the city controls what happens on those properties with regards to affordable housing units so that people are not displaced. Second piece of it is to protect those NOAAs, naturally occurring affordable housing units along those specific corridors. That's another way to protect people from being displaced. It's obvious that light rail will result in redevelopment, in development opportunities. The issue is whether residents and businesses will be displaced. And that's really what we want to mitigate against. The comprehensive plan has policies along those lines, but we also tap into a future investment in corridors like the Silver Line or extension of the Gold Line or extension of the Blue Line or maybe even the Red Line to the north to make sure that we continue to preserve opportunities for people to live along these corridors. There's another piece of the comprehensive plan that also talks about the city taking 5% of its housing trust fund, whatever amount that is in the future, whether it stays at $50 million for the foreseeable future. It's talking about taking 5% of that at least and reinvesting them in vulnerable communities to mitigate displacement. It also went further to say the city should make concerted effort to look at diverting about 50% or so of its capital investment dollars over the next 20 years into corridors and communities that are struggling. And those are really the places where you end up displacing people if you're not careful. And the reason why the comprehensive plan makes these policies is to make sure that investments are going into these vulnerable communities so that people are not displaced from their jobs, which are their means of livelihood, or from the type of housing that they have been living in for so long.
Our next question will go to Ashley Fahey.
Hi, Tara. Thanks so much for your time. I don't know if this is the right path. I got cut off earlier with the connection, but what's been the feedback so far on the 2040 plan? Any major things that jump out at you that you guys want to do more work in, or major themes that I guess have emerged in the last 3 or so weeks that since this plan has been released?
So I'll answer that in a number of ways. Coming out of the executive summary itself, even before the document came out, we had one of our ordinance advisory committee members sent us a list of 19 nasty questions. That's exactly what it titled it, 19 nasty questions, which really dealt with housing diversity, or the fact that we're expanding single-family residential zoning districts to include different forms of housing units. Questions related to HOA, homeowners association covenants, and things like inclusionary housing. And now these are not necessarily questions coming from him, but he is channeling members of the community that if I live in this neighborhood, these are the questions that I will have. And so we had a meeting with him and Professor Walters from University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and to kind of talk through this. So we're working through those 19 questions right now. But I'm sure those questions mirror what a number of community members will have. And so we're working through them with them right now. Some of them are really great questions. Some of them are questions that really provoke a lot of thoughts. Earlier this week, I believe it was yesterday, our Deputy Planning Director, Alison Craig, presented the plan to the Commercial Real Estate Group, NAOP, and they had a lot of questions as well. And there was a lot of developers who was very well attended. I understand one of the quotes you take away from that meeting was everybody should drop whatever they're doing and make sure that they focus on the comprehensive plan and the Unified Development Ordinance as two major things that will impact development in the next year. I think that's a good thing. Tomorrow afternoon, I'm also going to be meeting with Real Estate, the Building Industry Coalition, home builders. I will be meeting with them as well and talking about the fiscal aspect of this plan. I got an email from our former university city planner, Martin Zimmerman, praising this plan and saying that this is really great and asking us if we could tidy up some of the metrics, in there so that way we can keep ourselves accountable. And so we've been getting a lot of really good comments for the most part, but also really thought-provoking questions and questions that we definitely envision, but we have not had anyone who said this plan is not good. I mean, if I may say so myself, this is a really good plan. A lot of thoughts have gone into this. The community has been really engaged in the process. I will say that we will not be here at this point if not for the community, their input, their commitment to the process. So we want to continue to have conversations around this. We want to continue to have people asking us questions, whether they are residents or businesses or developers or even visitors. I've had people reached out to us from as far away as New York and New Jersey, asking us if we could share our city building games with them, because they are also embarking on this journey. So it's not only been comments from Charlotteans, but we've also had people from out of town, out of state, asking if we could share our experiences with them as well.
Danielle, back to you.
Oh, I can wait if someone else has a question. I didn't realize I still had my.
At the moment, it's just you and Ashley, so.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit. The plan mentions the idea of community benefit agreements. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the strategies to incentivize the type of development that you want to see in some of these, community benefits, like bringing grocery stores, which I know you've talked about before, and how to get developers interested in doing that?
So it's really not as much as what I would like to see, but what the community would like to see. Hence the reason why we say community benefit agreement. There are examples of this in the country, but I believe the plan actually cited an example either from Chicago or from Detroit. Like you said, grocery store is a really good one, attracting, college campuses or schools that could be private institutions. What exactly are the goals and aspirations of community members in their particular community. We see a very good example here in Charlotte with the Charlotte Land Trust, which was really organic and it's really community driven. That's the idea and the motive and the impetus behind the community benefit agreement. Staff will continue to be the resource, but we want to be able to also provide our community members with the tool that helps them to shape the type of community that they want. And when the developer comes to make an investment in a community, it's really important for community and developers, and I say those who build our cities and those who are the end users of the products, to really have a conversation among themselves, and we as planners and as generators of this comprehensive plan become facilitators in what happens in that whole agreement. Obviously, we will play a role in there, a major role in there, but I want it to be as organic as possible. I want it to be something that it's really a community-driven effort that's talking about the aspirations of what our community members want, and they can express this directly to the respective developers. And then we can come in and really help everybody to make sure that this goes the way it's supposed to go, either through some of our financial investment as well, but also through some of our expertise.
Ashley?
Thank you. Just wanted to talk real quick about the big ideas you have for each of the goals. A lot of them seem to be legislative kind of tactics and sort of long-term aspirational things. But things like inclusionary zoning, we know we'd have to go to the state to try to get local municipalities to pass something like that. Is there a discussion that's already been started, or is there expectation that there will be a discussion started at the state level to work through some of these legislative tactics to encourage more housing diversity and things like that?
Yes, I will say that we will be having those conversations with our legislators, obviously, in the near future. First of all, you said it right. This is a 20-year plan. And so it's not a plan that's going to, happen in another 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And as we expect that we're going to have almost 400,000 more people added to our population. In other words, by 2040, Charlotte will be about 1.2 million people. We got to think about housing. We got to think about jobs. We got to think about environmental sustainability. We got to think about mobility for these people. We got to think about its impact on trees and its impact on literally everything: water resources, food, solid waste, utilities. How do we make sure that we put ourselves in a position not only to continue to make sure that our people who are born here, who grew up here, who have lived here for their lives, continue to find Charlotte attractive and Charlotte inclusive, but people who also move in here to join us, how do they find that city that's diverse and inclusive and vibrant? Affordable housing is a very critical part of that. And we've got to look for different solutions to affordable housing. So there are certain things that may not work today legislatively, but could work tomorrow. And if someone has a better idea as to how, we could make all of these things work, we're open to them. But there are things that we've got to look at, and we talked a little bit in our fiscal impact analysis, which is part of this plan, that we've got to explore impact fees as well. Why people may quickly jump at that as, a terrible thing. The fact is that most of our developers who do business in Charlotte today do businesses in other cities where there are those fees, and they're not running away from those markets. They're actually going to those markets. How can we do things like this that today may be legislatively infeasible, but tomorrow with conversations could legislatively change as needs are changing, as things are evolving? We're going to have to sit down and come up with solutions that can continue to make Charlotte that place where people want to do business, where people want to live, where we can compete favorably and successfully with other cities, and not just in the Southeast, and not just nationally, but even internationally. That's the 5th fastest growing city in the country, the 15th most populated city in the country. Obviously, there's something about Charlotte that brings people here. But the fact is that people go to Denver too. They go to Chicago, they go to Seattle, they go to Austin, they go to Atlanta, they even go to Raleigh. How can we make sure that we keep ourselves competitive if we don't have the type of housing that people want when they move here? People will vote with their legs. And so we need to find a way around that. So it may not, those things that we've said in this comprehensive plan, the big ideas. There's a reason we call them big ideas. There's a reason we call them bold ideas. Could be because they're not something we do today or that we're comfortable with today, but they are things that we're going to have to address at some point in our evolution as a growing and evolving city. And so that's why they're big. That's why they're bold. It's to generate conversations, but even more importantly, is to generate, some solutions. So at some point, I believe, in the foreseeable future, probably in the next few months, once the plan is adopted, there will be discussions around what goes on council's legislative agenda, and it could be that this may be one of those that will go on our legislative agenda as we discuss with our leaders at the state level.
We'll stay with Ashley.
Great, thanks so much. One other thing that stood out to me in reviewing the plan was this idea that every neighborhood would have a climate resiliency plan, especially with climate change. Can you talk about what, at a high level, that could look like, and how would a neighborhood or a community develop such a plan?
Yeah, we have a good example that we actually build off of, Camp North End. Now in this plan, we're calling it Resiliency Innovation District. We know that climate change will be perhaps the most important issue of our lifetime from this point going forward. Things are changing. And we know that neighborhoods, from one neighborhood to the other, how people deal with, tree canopy, how people deal with recycling materials, how people deal with different things. Those are things that we want to make sure that we embrace as a city. And so we see a city of Charlotte that has, from place to place, this idea of smart planning, this idea of smartness that not only talks about land uses and public transportation and how you use them, but also how you make sure that you have the type of neighborhood that does not heat up too much, that it forces people to move away from there, either because we're investing in so much concrete and, that not enough trees that could really be inequitable in many respects. And so when you look at our tree canopy, for example, right now, we talk about the fact that there's a part of our city, especially in the Crescent, that's actually hotter than other parts of our city. And that's because, there's a lot of impact on trees in those communities. And so I like to see us as a community, but in neighborhoods, look closely at things that we can do to continue to make our neighborhoods, our communities, and our city more environmentally friendly, more resilient, more environmentally sustainable.
Danielle.
Can you talk a little bit about kind of the process of these place types and how they relate to, the zoning districts, and sort of what the overall map will look like when you're coming up with, where these place types will go, and how do you get to that point? If I'm a resident, what should I expect? In terms of, do I become the neighborhood 1 type or the neighborhood 2 type? Like, how are you kind of making those decisions?
That's a really great question, and I thank you for the opportunity to respond to that. So we don't have anything called place types today. We typically have land use plans that strictly focus on, what type of uses go where. With place types, it's not just talking about the types of uses. It's also context sensitive. It talks about how those uses relate to other things in the community, such as transportation or trees, or overall even the environment. When the council adopts the comprehensive plan, hopefully adopt the comprehensive plan in April of 2021, the next step is to begin to map place types. If you recall how we did it with the transit-oriented development ordinance, it started obviously with the blue line transit-oriented plans that were developed for the blue line some years ago, and the TOD framed policies along those blue line policies, which are strictly along our blue line light rail corridor. And then after the council adopted it, we started to map about 1,500 different parcels along our blue line to make them fall into one of 4 three TOD categories, whether they be the most intensive one or they be the most transitional one. It's the same process that we're going to take with place types. So we've got about 10 place types overall. Neighborhood 1, like you said, neighborhood 2. And as we will look at where we are today, we will begin to engage the community based on how we see the entire city. There are certain places today that are predominantly single family. That's neighborhood 1. It will have predominantly single family, but we want to make sure that we expand those areas to also have opportunities for townhouses, duplexes, triplexes as well. And so we will map those out with the community, with them providing input, and this is not something that we're going to do in the room, but we will have a lead in the conversation. As based on this land use plan that we have today as a city, here is what we see with these place types. There are certain places that will be most suitable for higher density uses, for example, along our light rail areas or close enough to some shopping activity areas or close enough to areas of activities that not necessarily shopping, but they have a lot of jobs in those areas that we want people to be able to live close to those areas, therefore having the type of 10-minute neighborhoods that we've been talking about. So that's kind of how we do it. It's really a mapping exercise where we will have, depending on what the coronavirus, where we are in the phase of reopening due to the pandemic, we may have, open house meetings where people will come and be able to see boards all over the room. But if not, we've also worked out a way where we can actually do this virtually as well, where people can break out into rooms and be able to see different place types and how it applies to their own neighborhoods. And these place types are not stuck. They can be improved upon, but the principles will probably stay the same, such as we're having different types of housing units in this area, or in an innovation mixed-use district, we have a mix of housing, the type of research buildings that could create jobs, and retail facilities. And so some of the principles, for the most part, will stay the same, but those maps themselves, we will let the community be able to play around with them to make sure that we still go with the main policies, such as we would like people to live within 10 minutes of where they don't have to drive to get there. We would like to be able to see trails and train go together when it comes to transit or trail-oriented development. We would like to see the type of environment that we create that will allow, type of accessibility to full-service grocery stores or even banks. So those place types are not just operating on their own, but they are linked to some overall policies that we're using them to accomplish. But they will have all within them fingerprints of the community all over them. They will not be something that staff will be doing in-house without community input, and then eventually will go back to the council. But before I stop on that, though, is that the place types themselves are what inform what our Unified Development Ordinance eventually looks like. You do not do that Unified Development Ordinance, especially the zoning ordinance, Peter. You don't do that in a vacuum. The place types will inform what those regulations look like, how high or how tall, how many stories, what's the scale of building, how does it relate to the next use, in the next neighborhood, how does it relate to the uses next to it. And so it's going to have to be that we get those place types right, and then they feed into the Unified Development Ordinance, which eventually will be adopted, hopefully by Council in September of 2021.
Ashley Fahey.
Thank you. Last night, of course, there's a lot of discussion around industrial zoning and where that goes in town. As it relates to the 2040 plan, the UDO, and of course, the manufacturing and logistics place type, what do you see just from what you've heard from council and residents, around industrial land and where that's appropriate to be built in Charlotte, and the fact that we are losing that land to other kinds of development?
So I have been saying to council for the last year and a half that we are losing industrial lands. We've done our own assessment within the department to look at, what that picture was like 5 years ago. and what that picture is like today. And we do know, like I believe it was Mayor Pro Tem who said yesterday, that according to the Charlotte, the Business Alliance, the second most paying job, especially for communities of color and people who do not have high degree, in education, is in logistics. And we don't have enough land to accommodate that, and we are competing with other communities, whether in state or out of state, that have the acreage to be able to compete. It just so happens that of the petition we looked at yesterday, it just so happened that that particular area of our city over the last several years has been trending in that direction of having warehouses, distribution points, logistic points. For obvious reasons, it's close to the airport. It's a major intersection of freeways. Amazon chose that location for a reason. I do understand the reluctance to accept it because of the scale of development. But the fact is that if that land was to be developed with what it's currently entitled for, it will result in about 400 and some single-family units that would generate about 4,500 traffic trips compared to this industrial this use that would generate about 2,300 vehicular trips. While that does not necessarily assuage feelings of residents who live there, because perception is reality, we are going to continue to see a little bit more of that in our city, especially in outlying areas where you are close enough to huge transportation infrastructure like freeways. You're going to continue to see a little bit more of that. That's how we manage it is very important. So in our comprehensive plan, we've redefined what heavy manufacturing or light manufacturing could be. We've talked about light industry, we talked about distribution, warehousing, logistics, light manufacturing, but we also talk about an innovation and mixed-use district where we can still have some type of industrial development, but that will still accommodate residential units close enough to it so people can be close to where they work. And also close to other things in the community. We're going to continue to see more of that if Charlotte wants to maintain its competitive edge. And so as we go into the future, though, is to be mindful also that we do not put the type of industrial development in areas where people live that could harm their health, that could harm their well-being, that could also be a problem when it comes to air quality. And so we're going to definitely be very mindful of that as we go forward, that we build buffers, or we talk about buffers between that type of industrial development and where people live. Because nobody should have to make a hard choice, right? That, they only have to live in a place that's going to pollute their water or pollute their air. We don't want people to have to be in that space. And so what we're going to continue to do as we go into the future, and the comprehensive plan has that, is the place types that deals with this type of manufacturing, we'll have to put them outside and with buffer between where they are and where people live. But at the same time, wanting to make sure that people are close enough to jobs and to still be able to allow the developers and those who do these businesses when they come to town to still be able to access public transportation means for them to deliver their goods and to be able to, get to the airport and get to, the source of distribution of their goods as well.
Okay, well, we're out of questions this afternoon. Taiwo, I'll toss it back to you for just one moment to make some brief closing remarks, and then we'll wrap it up for the day.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Again, I will encourage people to read the comprehensive plan, and if there are things that jump out at you, please do not hesitate to reach back out to us. Again, CLT Future 2040. .com. Please go there and get on there and feel free to review the documents and make comments and even call. And if you really want a copy of the game, please do not hesitate to check. Again, you can email us at cltfuture2040@charlottenc.gov. We have about 1,000 of the games that we are ready to distribute. And so if you want to do that and play with your family, we definitely would like to know what your experience is. And I will close with this. There are 4 metrics that we're using to really be able to determine success for this plan. One is what we call access to essential amenities, goods, and services. How close are you when you look at this plan? What does it do to you in terms of your proximity or how you're able to access essential amenities, goods, and services? Number 2 is access to housing opportunities. There are people in our city today who are struggling with affordable housing. Does this plan and the policies proposed in this plan, as well as the big ideas in this plan, do they bring you closer to your dream of housing opportunities in our city? Or do they take you further away from it? The third metric is how access to employment opportunities is also very important. People move to Charlotte not just because they have families here, but also because Charlotte has jobs to offer. And we want to continue to be that city that people can move to and find the type of job that they want, whether they have higher education or not, the type of job that they want wherever they want it. But how close are you to being able to access those job opportunities? We want to continue to be that city that attracts different types of jobs that people find themselves in. And finally, the fourth metric by which we measure success for this plan is environmental justice. How do we make sure that every use that is entertained and that is developed does not have a negative environmental impact on our neighborhoods, on our city as a whole, and on residents, of course, and on businesses? So these are the things that are going to help us to be able to make sure that we grow in an equitable fashion, because when people have access to housing, have access to amenities, goods and services, have access to jobs, and they know that they live in an environmentally friendly community, then things become more equitable than what we have today. We need to move past the old notion of people who live in the arc and the wedge, as if that's the way our city should continue to be described. Our city should be described as one city, where regardless of where you live in this city, you are able to have access to goods, to amenities, to services, to jobs, to housing, and to a environmentally friendly environment. So please, read the document again. We will be sending out information shortly as to when we're going to be having community conversations, and I look forward to that. Thank you very much once again.
Taiwo, thank you so much for your time, and thank you to all of the reporters and news outlets who joined us this afternoon. And we hope you all have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we'll talk to you soon.